It would have been easier to treat that night like a mistake if it had felt new, but it didn't. Nothing about it surprised me once I stopped thinking about the house and started thinking about everything that came before it. Patterns do not announce. Themselves, they repeat quietly until one day you recognize them all at once. I had been the reliable one for as long as I could remember, the one who didn't need reminders, who didn't need rescuing, who didn't create emergencies. My sister had always been the opposite, and because of that, she received attention in ways I never did. Not more love exactly, but more urgency, more protection, more excuses. When we were younger, I noticed it in small ways. First report cards came home and mine were. Expected, hers were celebrated even when they were average. If I forgot something, it was carelessness. If she forgot, it was stress. If I stayed quiet, it meant I was fine. If she cried, it meant something needed to be fixed immediately. I learned early that stability made you invisible in our house. Being steady meant you were already handled even when you weren't. As we got older, those differences stopped being small. My sister started borrowing money in her early 20s, small amounts at first. Then larger ones, always with a reason, always temporary. My mother helped her quietly at first, then openly and eventually without hesitation. It became normal to hear conversations about covering something for her, a payment, a bill, a missed deadline. I was included in those conversations only when my agreement was assumed not requested. You can help just this once, my mother would say, and I would, because saying no felt like creating a problem, and I had built my place in the family around not being one. There were moments I could have stepped away. I can see that now clearly. The first time my savings account dipped lower than it should have because I covered something that wasn't mine. The time I co-signed something I didn't believe in because my mother insisted it was necessary. The quiet resentment that followed each time something I worked for became something shared without discussion. None of it felt large enough to confront at the time. It felt like part of being the responsible one. You absorb pressure so others don't have to. Even the way my mother spoke about me reflected it. She would describe me to others as independent, strong, self-sufficient, words that sound like compliments but carry a different meaning. Inside a family dynamic like ours, they meant I required less from her, which in turn meant she gave less to me without feeling like she was taking anything away. When she spoke about my sister, her tone changed. She needs support. She is going through a lot. She just needs a little help. The same phrase repeated for years until it stopped sounding temporary. I remember one specific moment clearly. It was a Sunday afternoon and my sister had come over upset about something I don't even remember. What anymore? My mother sat beside her on the couch holding her hand while I stood in the kitchen making coffee. I had just finished explaining a work issue, something that had been weighing on me for weeks. My mother nodded politely and then turned back to my sister mid-sentence as if what I said had already reached its conclusion without needing one. That was the moment I understood something I didn't say out loud. Then my problems were information, hers were emergencies. The house was just the largest version of something that had been happening in smaller ways for years. It wasn't only about property, it was about access, about assumption, about the belief that what was mine could be used if it solved something for someone else, especially if that someone else was my sister. My mother didn't suddenly decide to exclude me. She had been doing it gradually, adjusting the balance until removing me entirely from a decision felt reasonable to her. Even the presence of her boyfriend fit into that pattern. He paid attention in a way that seemed respectful, at first asking questions about work, about the house, about how things were structured. I answered because there was no reason not to. It felt like conversation, not assessment. I can see now that he was learning where the boundaries were and, more importantly, where they weren't. He understood something before I did, that the system in our family allowed certain things to happen as long as they were framed as helping. What changed after that night was not the pattern. It was my awareness of it. I stopped looking at individual actions and started seeing the structure behind them. The decisions made without me, the expectations placed on me, the quiet way my role had been defined without my agreement. None of it was new. I had just been participating in it without naming it. Once you see something clearly, it becomes difficult to return to the version of it that made it easier to accept. I didn't feel angry. Not. In the way people expect, I felt something steadier than that, something that didn't rush or demand reaction. It was recognition. And recognition does not need volume. It only needs time to settle into place. The boundary was crossed long before. The house, but the house made it impossible to ignore. It turned something that had always been emotional into something measurable. Documents, signatures, access. Things that could not be explained away with tone or intention. I did not confront anyone after that night. I did something else instead. I went to work and treated my own situation the way I would treat a file placed on my desk. I removed myself from it emotionally and started reading. The first step was confirming what had actually been filed. I pulled every record connected to the property. Deeds, transfers, timestamps, notary details, everything that existed in the system. It was all there, arranged neatly, processed without resistance. My name appeared where it should not have been. A signature that looked close enough from a distance but collapsed under attention. The kind of detail most people would not question unless they were trained to. I was. The second step was understanding access. My mother had never handled my paperwork directly. She did not know the systems well enough to move through them alone. That meant someone else had guided it. Someone who understood timing, formatting, process. Her boyfriend's questions from weeks earlier started to arrange themselves into something clearer. They had not been casual. They had been preparatory. I requested a full audit trail, digital access logs, submission records, identity verification notes. The system does not forget. It records quietly, without judgment. It showed me where the document originated, when it was submitted, and what information was used to validate it. There were inconsistencies, small ones, the kind that only matter when you are looking for them. I marked each one down. At the same time, I reviewed my financial accounts, not because I expected something else, but because patterns rarely stay contained to one place. There were 3 withdrawals I did not recognize, even amounts, clean numbers, timed in a way that suggested planning rather than urgency. I traced them back slowly. The destination account was not mine. It connected to a name I already suspected before I confirmed it. I did not call my mother when I saw that. I did not call my sister either. There was nothing either of them could say that would change what I was looking at. This was no longer about explanation, it was about verification. Once something is documented, it does not need interpretation. I contacted an attorney the next morning. I did not present it as a personal situation. I presented it as a case, timeline, evidence, access points. She listened without interruption and asked questions that focused on structure rather than emotion. When she finished reviewing the documents, she did not hesitate. The transfer was not valid. The signature did not hold. The authority to execute the document did not exist. Everything that had been done relied on the assumption that no one would challenge it. That assumption was the boundary. Not the act itself, but the belief behind it. The belief that I would accept it. That I would adjust around it the way I always had. That I would absorb the consequence because that had been my role for years. This time I did not. We filed immediately, quietly, no calls, no warnings. The process moved through the system the same way the original documents had, except this time the information aligned with reality. Every step created a record. Every record narrowed the space for interpretation. My mother tried to reach me twice during that week. I saw the calls. I did not answer. It was not avoidance. It was timing. Conversations belong at the beginning of a decision, not after it has already been made and executed. Anything said now would only be reaction. By the end of the week, everything was in motion. The property status was flagged. The financial activity was under review. Notifications were issued to the parties involved. None of it required my presence beyond the initial submission. Systems handle things like this without needing emotion. That was the moment something shifted internally. Not when I found the evidence, not when I filed, but when I realized I was no longer waiting for anyone to acknowledge what had happened. I did not need agreement. I had documentation. For the first time, I was not adjusting myself to maintain a relationship. I was allowing the situation to move forward exactly as it was built to, without interference from me. I did not return to the house right away, even after the filings were in motion. There was no urgency anymore. The situation was already moving, in the direction it needed to, and my presence would not change, that I stayed where I was. Kept my routine intact, went to work on time, completed what was in front of me, and let the system do what it was designed to do. Quiet processes replaced loud, assumptions records corrected what conversati.